He's about 455 yards away. He's going to hit about a 2-iron, I think.
This is the School of Motion podcast. Come for the MoGraph, stay for the puns. Do you have any idea just how much motion design gets created these days? It's silly. If you're only looking at the cream of the crop, the stuff that ends up on Motionographer, you're only seeing the tip of a massive iceberg. And one of our goals with this podcast is to expose MoGraphers to as many different sides of the industry as possible. And that means we're not just going to talk about the work that studios are putting out. We want to look into every little nook and cranny of this profession. So on this episode, I chat with 2 TV producers who happen to hire motion designers all the time for work they do. Joke and Biagio, and yes, those are their real names. They run Joke Productions, a company that creates TV shows. They've worked with MTV, Oxygen, CBS, NBC, Bravo, VH1, and many, many other networks. And their specialty is a form of content that is sometimes referred to as reality TV. These 2 are hilarious, really, really smart, and they offer up some amazing insight into the kind of MoGraph work that these types of shows need. We dig into the economics of reality TV, how the business model even works, and how a motion designer can get work from production companies doing this type of content, and there's a lot out there. There's a ton of tactical info, especially in the second half of the interview, so take notes. And speaking of notes, don't forget that every episode of this podcast has show notes that you can find on schoolofmotion.com. And if you haven't already, sign up for a free student account on the site to get our weekly Motion Mondays newsletter. It's a very short email. You can read the entire thing while you're in the bathroom. And it goes over industry news, recent MoGraph work that's awesome, new tools, stuff like that. And you'll also get exclusive discount codes that we occasionally send out to our list. And now, enjoy this conversation with Joke Productions. Joke and Biagio, thank you both for coming on this podcast. I cannot wait to start just peppering you with questions.
Oh my gosh, we're excited to be here. I personally am a little starstruck. Since you'll be saying I'm coming into your ear holes, or you recently changed your opening tagline, I think, from ear holes to something else, right? I heard on the last podcast.
Yeah, and actually I was going to bring this up. So what we now say for the intro is come for the MoGraph, stay for the puns. And I thought that you both might actually enjoy puns because I was looking at some of the titles of your work. And I saw a show called Foodie Call, and
yes.
I really enjoyed it. And for anyone who's listening doesn't know about Foodie Call, I might get this wrong. You guys can correct me, but it's a show where someone's having relationship problems, and you try to solve it by teaching them to cook, and they solve it with food, right?
Yeah, it's at a certain point in a relationship, whether you're, having troubles or you're about to move in or you want to ask somebody for the next step, all the way to our finale was actually a proposal. And we teach the man mostly to pretty much cook his way into her heart.
And who came up with that brilliant title?
Okay, so this is actually a great story. So I don't know if you know who Warren Littlefield is, but he was the former president of NBC. He basically created must-see TV in name and content back during the 90s and was there for like Friends and Will and Grace. Anyways, so he had actually optioned a book. The book's title was a little bit racy. It was actually called Cook Your Way Into Her Pants, which is kind of like, whoa. And he sets it up at the time at the Style Network, which is a network for 35 plus educated women. And we're like, you can't go with that title. You can't even go with and the recipes were, some of them were X-rated. I can't even repeat them on your show because iTunes would kick you off. So me and Joke were like, okay, we're romantics at heart. We're a couple. We're like, we need to figure out how to dial this back and sort of make it work for Style Network. And I think Joke really took the lead on this one.
Yeah, well, but if you think that the title is punny, within the show, we would present the guy with 3 menu boxes that all had puns. So whether it was like, tap that bass, tie me up, So I mean, we had puns galore.
I'm dying.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, that is excellent. All right, well, I like you both a lot already. So let me ask you this. Most of the guests that we've had on the podcast are animators, designers. We have had a producer on, but she works at the mill, so she's sort of a traditional like studio producer. So I think that a lot of our audience may not be really familiar with what you two do. And frankly, your title may change from show to show. So could you kind of explain what it is you two do?
Yeah, I think it'll be easiest if I explain how we ended up into it, because it was sort of a crazy route. So we sort of started out unscripted, like a lot of people. We met at UCLA. We thought we wanted to be screenwriters, and this was like right in the Kevin Smith heyday. You know, everybody was writing Clerks ripoffs. That also ages us, but basically, all of our friends, it's set in a coffee shop. Another show in a coffee shop. Another script in a coffee shop. So we were like, maybe we should try documentary. Get out in the world and meet some real people to inspire our screenplays. And that actually made us realize how much we loved real people in unscripted. So what had happened was we were doing a documentary right around the time Survivor took off. And we were like, what is this new reality TV? What is this unscripted world? What's happening? It seemed really cool. And we had all the gear. This was when DV had just hit, digital video. DV stood for digital video, for those too young to remember when the Canon XL1 made a big splash and changed all our lives.
Oh, yeah.
And so we were like, we should try this. And so what we started doing back then is almost exactly what we're doing now, 15 years later, which is we come up with ideas for television shows based on real people, places, or things that are just unscripted. It could be a reality-style game show like Beauty and the Geek or Scream Queens. It could be a documentary or a documentary series like the MTV True Life special we did, or Cage, which we did for MTV, or our theatrically released documentary Dying to Do Letterman. Or it could be like a true crime documentary series like our current show 3 Days to Live. So basically anything that falls into that unscripted bucket, we sort of find a way in. We create an initial pitch tape, a sizzle reel, to present to networks and say, this is our concept for the show. This is kind of what it would look like. This is what it would feel like. We think it would be so many episodes. And then hopefully a network likes it, and then they fund the show. And it's very similar sort of to like getting funded for an independent film. You know, they basically fund it. We make it. You know, we're paid to make the show, but it's not like they hand us the money and we make it and whatever money's left we keep. Like, it's all very budgeted out. We hire professionals to shoot, to edit. Crews can go from, you know, as small as 20 people to as big as 200 or 300, depending on the size of the show. And at the end of the day, we deliver that show to the network. So we're in charge basically of coming up with the idea, shooting it, editing it, color correcting it, sound mixing it, and delivering that final project to a television network or a studio ready for air. Did I miss anything, Joke?
I mean, there's a lot that goes into it, but that sums it up pretty well.
That's the simplified version.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, our titles are, you know, executive producers on these projects, and there's lots of companies like us out there because there's a lot of unscripted. And again, a lot of times reality gets either a bad name or people think of it as a very limited kind of thing. But anything that is not, you know, people sitting in a writer's room, beating out scripts, making up stories, falls under unscripted. So, you know, game shows are unscripted, variety shows, you know, there's so much. Docu-series, docudramas, docu-comedies, documentaries.
It's a good point. I often talk about movies, right? The movies, we've had 100 years plus to sort of be educated on the different genres of movie. And I think even your average moviegoer knows there's a difference between like Plan 9 from Outer Space and Citizen Kane. Like, they're two very different types of films. But yet a lot of people will look at unscripted and sort of think of like a housewife show as a reality show, but also think of the First 48 as a reality show. And they really couldn't be more different. So we're lucky enough that we've been able to work across all those genres. So in the way that some film producers are able to do action and comedy and, you know, rom-com, we've been able to do doc and reality and big game show reality, and half-hour comedy. We've been lucky to do that, but they are very different from each other. So, and a lot of people also forget, unscripted, literally built cable television back in the day. I mean, shows like Modern Marvels, anything that was on History Channel before Survivor was even close to hitting, was all considered unscripted. There hadn't been this huge wave of reality TV yet, which is really just a genre underneath the big unscripted bucket.
Makes sense. Okay, so This is one of the things I wanted to ask you about. What you just described, which sounds like a lot. It's a lot of responsibility, by the way, to do all those things. Yeah, it's a lot. So what you're describing, if it was a film or a commercial, I might use the term director to describe the person in charge of doing all that. But that's not the term you used. You used producer. So in TV land, is producer, is it kind of have a different definition?
So the simplest thing to think of is in film, the director is considered, quote unquote, the final say, right?
The chief creative visionary.
The director is the chief creative visionary. In television, whether that's scripted or unscripted, the producer is. So Shonda Rhimes clearly is the chief creative visionary on Scandal, Grey's Anatomy, and all of her shows, but she's an executive producer. She's not a director. So television and film have that different. What we do is more than just being a producer or a director. Even if you think about film, we are, in essence, the mini studio, where the network is the financier. We are the ones who do the schedule, do the budget, legal, liabilities, insurance. We have to bring it in on time and on budget. We answer to our financier, which is the network. So not only are we the chief creative visionary, we also have to be the studio. And again, this is the non-sexy, non-creative back end of things.
Right.
But, we also have to make sure it all works and we can deliver. And so to get to a point in the business where a network will trust you with their money, a financier will trust you with that money, you have to kind of build up a list of credits where they know that you will deliver on time and on budget.
Yeah. And by the way, it is, again, I'm a kid from Cleveland. Joke is from Belgium. We both had no connections to Hollywood, and neither one of us comes from money. So you have to understand, to get here was really exciting for us. But at the end of the day, we also signed a piece of paper saying that we're going to deliver, or else we're responsible. And we're responsible means, if we blow this, my kids aren't going to college, and we're selling the house.
Right, you're living in a van.
So it is on the two of us. I mean, we're not funded by our actual company, our overhead, everything is paid for by the two of us.
Yeah, we're an independent company.
Yeah, we're an independent company. And there's a few of us out there. A lot of, you've probably seen in the news, a lot of reality companies have quote unquote sold or they've gotten funded. We've never done that. We've, had the opportunity a couple times to consider it, but we like being independent because we get to do what we want. But it is a big financial, I guess risk is the right word. It doesn't feel risky to us because we love it, but it is. You gotta have a certain tolerance for risk, and I know you know that personally because I know you ran your own shop back in the day, and obviously you run School of Motion. You take a lot on your shoulders.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you about that. So, looking through your site, by the way, anyone listening, we're going to have these links in the show notes, but if you go to Joke Productions, Joke spelled just like it sounds, you can see a lot of Joke and Biagio's work. And you guys have many websites, which we will link to in the show notes. you guys are very, very busy. All right. So, yeah. So, you have this DIY ethos. This indie ethos, I guess, it kind of percolates through a lot of the copy on your site and a lot of the shows you've worked on. And, that's very different than, say, Mark Burnett Productions or something like that, where I'm imagining the budget for one episode of Survivor is probably what you're used to getting for some of these series, right? And is that the case, or am I misrepresenting? But also, why is that appealing to you? Why wouldn't you want to, grow and become this massive production company that's doing, $1 million episodes and stuff like that?
Well, so two things. One, in our opinion, the number of the budget, how large the budget is, should not reflect on the attitude, the DIY attitude. I think actually, contrary to what, obviously you guys see from the outside, most people in reality, I feel come from somewhat of a DIY attitude. We're always the underdog. I mean, just look at the Emmys. We're still the underdog. We've all got here, created this genre. Most of us who are at this level, started at it when it started, 15, 20 years ago, or when it started blowing up. And so we all, we're scraping things together. So, while yes, there's certain companies that get bigger and, we've worked at some of those companies coming up, the problem with that is, as you know, with anything in life, the bigger it gets, the bigger the bureaucracy gets, the more money gets eaten by other things and doesn't actually go to, creatives or things that make that money end up on the screen, as you say. So for us, I think we grew up, as Biagio said, kind of as filmmakers in the 90s. And so it was, Rebel Without a Crew and
in Stu's book, Stu Mastowich, I'm sure you know Stu, DV Rebel's Guide was it's still my Bible. I love that book.
So that was our film school, I mean, we went to film school, but that was real. We were like, wow, this is the revolution. We were working with Canon, with the XL1s and the GL1s. And it was that's how we learned hands-on. So, for us, yes, you could get to a level where we're like, we're not going to bother with that anymore. We're just going to hire people who'll figure it out. Biagio's a geek.
Big geek.
I call him adorkable, but part of it is that he wants to know what's the latest, what's the greatest, what are the new tricks that we can use. And frankly, as people who have to, present our ideas to network to try and get things funded, so we're pitching constantly, it's what will give our pitches a leg up. And so sometimes, when we started, it was we were doing video pitch reels and people were like, wow, what is this? Because they didn't even know how to do them. Now everybody does them. We were doing rip-o-matics before everybody else was doing them. And now now it's wow, where did this come from? So, Biagio started adding broadcast quality graphics to our pitch reels, and people are like, wow, this is amazing. Or, new cameras or new ways to visually, add another layer to the storytelling that gives us an edge up when we present our pitches.
Well, I think we were lucky. We broke in at an interesting time when we were able to leverage new technology in an industry, unscripted, that was emerging. And so you had the old guard there, and we sort of came in and we were the new guard. And I think the reason why I'm so hesitant to just blow up and be a big company, and the reason I like sort of thinking of ourselves as a boutique, is because I don't want to lose that hands-on connection. I mean, we've been lucky enough to work with Mark Burnett Productions. We worked with Three Ball, who did Biggest Loser, and we ran Beauty and the Geek for them. We've worked with some really big companies, and it's nice, they have really good craft service at the office.
There you go.
comfortable furniture, and but what we saw, and it was fine for them, but the owners of those companies weren't making TV anymore. They were running companies.
Right.
And, I just took a G-Raid home with me last night, because I'm polishing up the first episode of a brand new TV series that we have coming out later this year. And it's I think it's awesome that I took a G-Raid home, and I'm sitting in our spare bedroom after we put the kids to bed. And I'm like, all right, I'm going to mess around with this edit, and it's going to be on TV in 5-6 months. The owners of the other companies aren't really doing that. Now, to their credit, they also have tons of money and drive Aston Martins, and I don't. but I got an iMac in my bedroom that I can make TV on. So, I think, or for example, this is what's really weird about me. Me and Joke, if you look at our equivalents at other companies, yeah, they're busy running the company, but I'm watching Film Riot. I love Ryan Connolly. And so he did a whole series on DJI Osmo and camera stabilizers. And so I was like, you know what, this is awesome. For our upcoming show, this would really work. So we went and bought the exact Ronin he was using on Film Riot. And yeah, it's a comedy YouTube channel, and we're doing this big serious series for a major cable network, but the techniques transfer. And I like that level of, getting my hands dirty. I think when the day comes that, our kids are older and getting ready to go to school, and, I'm heading towards a wheelchair or whatever, maybe then we'll sell the company and blow it up and take more of a figurehead seat. But for now, I just like to make stuff. And the truth is, and this, I'm sure, you can only make so much stuff at a time. I can't be hands-on 20 shows. We tend to do, 1, 2, or 3 series a year. And it's, and we're probably going to grow beyond that just because we have the ability to do so. But the more you take on, the less you can be hands-on. So, and I like that. Yes, you trade money. You trade big, huge numbers, maybe. but you get the fulfillment of still getting to make stuff. And I think we got into this because we like to make stuff.
Yeah, very early on, one of our very first meetings, we met with a production company head and we were pitching shows, and we're all, wide-eyed excitement creatives, don't even know yet what goes into actually making a show. We're just like, of course, we can make a TV show. And I remember very clearly to this day, he was just like, oh, it's been a rough day. And we're like, oh, no, what's going on? And he was like, just trying to figure out how to move money around and meet payroll and keep the lights on. And we were like, oh, that sounds awful.
Like, wow.
It's like,
wait, so you haven't picked up a camera recently? Wait, you're dealing with rent?
So,
you have to grow up. It's like I don't want to be a grown up and deal with that stuff.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So you just nailed it. We just don't want to grow up yet. So if it means we're not Mark Burnett yet, but we still get to really make stuff, then so be it. Listen, in Mark Burnett's defense, he's now at a level where he also still gets to make stuff because he's now so big. He has other people running everything for him. But it's that middle portion, right? Where from you're small like us to where he is now, where you end up having just to be a businessman.
That's so funny. There's a lot of things like that where there's this no man's land in the middle. At either extremes, it's great. You're a small company doing smaller budgets. You're a huge company with infinite budgets. In the middle, it's tough. Let me ask you about this. Now I'm really curious, and hopefully, I apologize in advance, but can you give me some insight into how much money are we talking here? Like, what if you pitch a show, and I know that there's a huge probably budget range, but let's say you're pitching a show to a cable network, an MTV or an Oxygen or something like that, and it's one of these, unscripted shows. How much money do they give you in order to produce it? And what kind of profit margins are you able to keep, or are you incentivized to make it cheaper so that you guys can, keep the company, keep the lights on? Can you talk about that a little bit?
Sure. Well, I can tell you this much. The profit margin, the company production fee ends up being 10% of the budget. That is standard, and that doesn't really move. So obviously, if you do lots of episodes or bigger budget shows, then there's more money there. If you do one episode of a $50,000 show, then, that's not a lot of money. Now that 10% production company fee has to cover the production company's cost. That's not just, profit. So if in a company, let's say you have a vice president of development and you have accountants that do, company accounting, or, you have the office assistant or whatever, that all has to come out of that 10% of the budget. The other 90% of the budget goes to the actual making of the show. So people who are freelance or get specifically hired or fill specific line items of that budget for that specific show. Now, as we talked about before, the wide range of unscripted TV shows, there is absolutely a wide range of budget. So where you might have an HGTV house show, where they will order 100 of them, where a flip this house or flip that. I mean, I'm not naming any names because I actually don't know which titles are, and I don't know their budgets, but
sure.
you know the kind of show I'm talking about,
right?
Where they will literally order 100 or 200 episodes. By that point, this is called amortization. The per episode budget ends up being sometimes 5 figures. Could be a $50,000 show. But again, you're doing 100 of them.
Right.
Right. So that's where you now hire a producer, and they're working on multiple episodes at the same time. And so you can save money by producing more episodes. So a lot of times, if a network orders 4 episodes, the per episode cost of that is going to be more expensive than if they order 10 episodes of that same show. So a lot of times, that's where there's, discrepancies even within one show, from a season 1 to a season 2 to a season 3 or beyond, is in the order that comes with it. Most, I would say, docu-series that are either an hour or a half hour. If half hours tend to range again from 5 figures to maybe 200,000, maybe, depending on how big it is or how much travel there is involved, how much the talent costs. if you're doing a Housewives of New York and, Bethany Frankel's coming back and it's, an hour-long show and it's now season, 6 or 8. And, those are going to be, several hundred thousands an episode because, you're traveling, you're dealing with expensive talent, et cetera, et cetera. So, if you do like The Wall, right, a show which is a big shiny floor game show on, I think it's NBC with Chris Hardwick. Obviously, the cost of building that whole thing and setting that whole thing up is really expensive, right? But then if you can shoot 5 episodes over 2 days because you're just running couples through, again, you can see how the budget then becomes per episode much smaller because the thing is built and now you can just kind of gang shoot episodes through it. So it's all a big puzzle and it all depends on the cost that it really takes to make it, the talent, and what there is. Now, I'm not going to tell you that there's a ton of money. There isn't. Networks, whether it's scripted or unscripted, are always trying to get more for less. And that's just part of the negotiations. And as producers, we have to find ways of, where can we save money? Where can we better spend the money so we get more bang for our buck? And sometimes it's pushing back to the network, say, well, if you really want this, that is going to cost you more. But when you're talking about, hey, I'm sending a whole crew up to Alaska for 3 months, like we know what that's going, those are hard costs the network can't get around.
Yeah. And I think the other trick to the puzzle, and it's something we've always prided ourselves on, is you need to find a way to stretch the budget by innovating, not by screwing people over. And so we work really hard to pay people fair rates and standard rates and not to ask people to do crazy hours. And instead we find other ways to innovate. So maybe instead of using the world's most expensive camera, we can get away with a DSLR for our B camera, and then now you're saving money on rental or gear or whatever. And so it's about also having a philosophy of how to spend that money. Because again, like Joke said, I mean, if you think of most cable shows on TV and you were going to just guess blindly, probably, high 5 to low to mid 6 figures is where almost 80% of those shows fall per episode. So, you're only going to be able to do so much. And I think the companies that succeed are the ones that get creative with the budgets in a way that are innovative and not exploitive. And that's so important to us. It's always been. And some companies follow that philosophy, some don't. We saw both when we were coming up. And it's a hard business when the margins are that small. It's another reason it helps to be hands-on.
Yeah, the DIY approach really helps there because, even from our independent scripted filmmaking days, if you don't have money to solve a problem, you got to get creative.
Right, right.
So, you try and throw creativity at it rather than money.
Yeah. And, by the way, one thing that we're able to offer, is because both me and Joke edit and shoot and do stuff is like if something goes wrong or if we need more extra hours, it's not like I'm not being paid as an editor. When I take the drive home at night and I throw in an extra 20 hours of work on an episode, I don't get paid anymore for that, but it's added value I'm bringing as the executive producer of the show. And so those are hours I'm able to add to, not replacing somebody else. I'm able to do on top of the people we have hired. So it's a little extra polish for our show. And we like to think it's things like that help us to succeed on really tiny budgets.
And do you guys have an opportunity ever to get residuals if a show you've produced does really, really well, goes into syndication?
Yeah, so there's not a whole lot of syndication for reality. Syndication is again, a scripted model because in scripted TV, what happens is the studio owns it and the studio deficit finances, right? So the network is only paying a license fee and then the studio adds to that budget with the rest of what it takes to get that show made. So then for the studio to recoup their costs, they sell that show into syndication or they sell it overseas, et cetera. Because reality budgets are much smaller and more affordable, the networks pretty much fund 100% of it. And so therefore there's not really a syndication model because they own it, they can re-air it, and they do. Now, depending on the network, and again, there's several conglomerates, right? There's Viacom, which owns a ton of networks. There's NBC Universal, which owns a ton of networks. There's A&E Networks, which own a ton of networks. So depending on kind of the conglomerate you're in, the deals get structured differently. Yes, there's usually some back end given to you in the deal. Most of that, even from the movies, they call monkey points, right? You don't necessarily always see something to that. That being said, in success, that absolutely gets shared, and that absolutely, there's stuff there in success. But again, success is like, you all of a sudden have a Jersey Shore on your hands. There's lots of success and there's lots to go around. You have a Duck Dynasty on your hand, but for a network, they still funded it. So for them to, first make all their money back, and, it has to be a huge success. But yes, once everything's paid off and the network has their money back and now they start selling it overseas, or even on iTunes or whatever, there's percentages that come your way.
A funny story. We got a check the other day, a residual check, a back end check for $8. And 4 of that is going to go to two other four of those dollars is going to go to 2 other producers. So me and Joke will keep the other 4, pay for parking somewhere. We'll pay for maybe a quarter of parking somewhere in LA. But yeah, I make more. Back in the day, I was an actor forever ago. I make more money in residuals from something I did 20 years ago than I'll ever make producing a TV show, probably, as far as residuals go.
I hear you. Not in it for the money. All right. So you brought up, Joke, 2 of reality TV's shining stars, the Jersey Shore and Duck Dynasty. And if anyone's unfamiliar with Jersey Shore, I mean, it's legendary. And it brings up an interesting point I want to ask you about. Now, I don't know for certain that the Jersey Shore wasn't really a documentary fly on the wall account of what happened on the Jersey Shore. But, there was some controversy around Duck Dynasty where it came out that, one of the guys on the show he didn't really act like that way in real life. And he didn't really have this big scruffy beard. He was clean shaven and stuff like that. So, and I've also noticed that reality TV, that term is kind of going away a little bit. And I'm hearing unscripted drama come up more. So how much of this quote reality TV is actually the camera person being totally silent, standing in the corner of the room, documenting? And how much is a producer maybe nudging people or just straight feeding people lines?
Okay, so again, we're talking about a wide range of programming, right? But even if you go to the most dry, straight up feature-length documentary, as real as it gets, by the sheer fact that the camera is pointing one direction and not another, the filmmaker is influencing that story and is telling you something, right? And quote unquote, maybe not showing you everything, therefore quote unquote, not being 100% real, right?
Sure.
So by the sheer fact that there is a filmmaker or a producer or a director, the fact that there's a storyteller telling someone else's story, there's going to be edits and creative license. That's just known. You can't get around it. So yes, there are some shows, Duck Dynasty, for example, from the very beginning was a docu-comedy, right? It was a sitcom. It was designed that way. It was found that way. They found these real people who, were making duck calls in the middle of Louisiana, West Monroe, and were making lots of money off of it. And yet still really they enjoyed fishing and camping and living off the land. Definitely the older generation more than the newer generation. But that was all real. So they took what was real. Those producers took what was real and was like, okay, how best can we tell the story? And they told a family sitcom story set in this world of this real family who still gathered for meals on Sundays. And, did they take license there with certain stories and this and that and there? Of course, probably. But I don't think the audience was watching that going, I wonder who came up with that line. They just enjoyed it, right? Real people going through real things. Is it edited for jokes? Are people going, hey, you know what? It'd be fun if you, tried this today? Absolutely. You know, when you deal with something like a Jersey Shore, you know, you look at a first season where you get these big crazy characters and you put them in a house, and that first season is obviously far more real than anything after, because this is them meeting, them building these relationships. They don't know anything. Once the Jersey Shore cast becomes so popular and so well known and pretty much pop culture, you know, where they can't not see themselves on their regular news feeds or whatever, you know, the show becomes somewhat meta, right? So now people start having issues with each other based on maybe what is out there in the press. Are those issues real? Yes. Would that have happened without the show? Well, no. But, you know, those are the boundaries. Even a Survivor, you know, you look at it and you're like, oh, well, that's real. These people are really fighting. They're really playing the game. They're really doing all of this. Yes, but there's 16 strangers you've put on an island and make them jump through hoops, you know, so is that real? No, those 16 strangers wouldn't have found themselves on an island jumping through hoops. But we create a world as the filmmakers or the storytellers, and then what happens within that world on those shows is real. At Beverly Hills Housewives, for example, that first season felt stilted and felt, you know, not as real, because you're like, okay, these women were cast. Some of them know each other. Most of them just know of each other. They don't really hang out. They're only hanging out for the show. And, you know, you're kind of going through it and, you know, there's a party and they get upset and whatever. You look at Housewives now, you know, these women have now for years known each other. They've literally become friends or enemies. And now the drama they have is real, you know, and they can't wait to get filming started again because they got to get something off their chest that happened. So, you know, every show is kind of different and finds its own unique thing. I think ultimately it's about, you know, what does the audience respond to? And I think the audience has been very vocal when something doesn't feel real, doesn't have an authenticity to it, and has rejected it. You know, as producers in this genre, we know that credibility and authenticity is extremely important, and that when you take 5 random people and you make them do things they wouldn't normally do and pretend that's their real life, it's not going to work. So the audience has made that clear. So, you know, I think that just so you know, from within the industry, there's absolutely an interest and a goal to keep things as real and authentic as possible.
Yeah, and you know, I think, Joey, one thing that's really interesting, and the way I always try to think about it, is as a TV producer, as a filmmaker, whatever, you have a contract with your audience, you know, and I think the audience needs to believe that whatever they're seeing abides by a certain set of rules. So, for instance, if you sit down to watch the first 48, where they're literally following the first 48 hours of a homicide investigation, there's no room for any producer to be doing anything. The cameras are flying the wall. You know, they're in there. I mean, that is like hardcore, as real as it gets. If you're watching, like we did a show with 2 YouTube stars, Rhett and Link, called Commercial Kings on IFC. And in that show, they were basically going to small businesses and they were helping them make ridiculous commercials that would go viral. You know, obviously that's a very different kind of show, and Rhett and Link are who they are. This is, you know, they really did make funny, you know, viral YouTube videos, and these companies are real companies, but obviously Rhett and Link are thinking a little bit ahead of time about, you know, what might be a good commercial for this company, or, you know, some funny things that can happen when they go visit this company. But that's not really, you know, our contract with the audience isn't like, hey, look at this incredible verite of how these 2 people make a commercial. It's like, oh, you're watching to see this crazy commercial at the end. So you need to make sure that your audience sort of understands where you're coming from. I think where shows go wrong is like, oh, I'm going to present this as a hardcore documentary series, but it's really clear things are happening behind the scenes. You might have heard there was a big controversy recently with a major network that was doing a show set around race hate. It was with a racially motivated group, and it turned out that on this particular show, producers behind the scenes were making things happen. And that is absolutely ludicrous and ridiculous given the subject matter of that show. So I think that there's a spectrum from being totally fly on the wall to being Duck Dynasty, where it is a family sitcom and they're probably having more fun putting the stories together than they are worrying about capturing real events. But the audience usually picks up on that. At least in our, in our opinion. I think for us, we tend to lean more towards authentic. I mean, our MTV show Caged was very fly on the wall, and we had the rare opportunity to film for a year. That never happens. Most of our shows will shoot an episode in 2 days. So it's obviously very different when you have a really long schedule versus a truncated schedule as well.
Right. And just by the way, the reason why a lot of times, sometimes there's interview bites and stuff like that is because if you're doing a docuseries, you might have missed something. And so, so you might need someone to explain what happened or, yes, are there times when we're like, okay, we really need to be able to get you into this room and out of this room. Can we have you just walk in again? Like that stuff happens, but that doesn't change, what is real about the people and what their interactions are with each other.
Also, one thing we learned from a hardcore documentarian, like real hardcore verite award-winning documentarian, is he used a tool called story bombs. And his tool, it literally was, if you're filming a scene and they end up basically talking about, what pajamas they're going to buy at the store, and it has nothing to do with the movie you're making, to ask a question, almost like an interviewer would ask a question, only to change the topic and then get out of the way and let that question drive wherever it goes. And so we've seen real documentarians, well-respected documentarians use that tool because, again, you only have so much time to shoot. So are they breaking the fourth wall? Would the Maisel brothers have ever done that? Probably not. The Maisel brothers had problems with Morgan Spurlock. Morgan Spurlock is considered by most to be the documentarian of our time, not according to the Maisel brothers, So it's all a spectrum, right? And I think at the end of the day, the best that you can do is try to deliver a story that moves people, and hopefully do that in the most authentic way possible.
That, I was going to push back at first, like I was saying, but I mean, you're kind of lying to the audience, but you kind of brought it back around in a way that makes sense to me where, when you watch Duck Dynasty, I think most people, I'm sure there are people who really do think it's 100% true what you're seeing, but I think for the most part, people are willing to suspend disbelief a little bit to be entertained. That's kind of the contract with the audience that you're talking about. So I have a few more questions about reality TV, but I want to get into how the motion designer fits into all of this. And I want to
you school of motion, Joey. You want to talk what? What are you talking about?
So how do our alumni break into the lucrative? Okay, so let me ask you this. So first of all, Biagio, if you go to your Vimeo page, there are some
by the way, I didn't even know this Vimeo page existed.
It's okay. It's fine.
Yeah.
I'm not hiding it from anybody. It's fine. Yeah.
I didn't mean to start anything. So you go on your Vimeo page, you've got some fairly polished, work on there. I mean, they're little motion tests, but there's like camera tracking and Cinema 4D. And I'm thinking, you're a TV producer. What the hell are you doing? Getting into Cinema 4D. So first of all, I want to know, are you doing some of the graphics work on your shows? I mean, are all TV producers secretly using After Effects, like in the closet?
Most producers are not, but, in his own way, we're like, J.J. Abrams will score the theme for Lost or do little things like that because he's a bit of a geek. So's my husband. I mean, he has done graphics on NBC shows and all kinds of stuff because it's we really wanted to get it done or we didn't have the money anymore. And he absolutely does this. This is kind of part of his hobby. Where, most human beings would have a hobby that is not related to their work. My husband's hobby is motion graphics and learning all the new tricks.
Okay, so let me say for the record, my only goal in life is to hire people who are better than me, and I love doing it. So yes, I'm a huge fan of motion graphics. Calling those things on my Vimeo page polished is kind. Thank you. But so again, because we've been lucky to work across all these crazy genres, we always want to try stuff, We were doing when we do reenactment shows like true crime or paranormal, I wanted to do photoreal visual effects and there was no money. So I learned Cinema 4D and I learned how to shoot, HDR probes and I learned how to use smart image-based lighting and I learned synth-eyes and now I just use the camera tracker in Cinema 4D for little things. When the money is gone on a show and we need to make more graphics, I can be serviceable. But I think kind of similar to your backstory, Joey, except that you're really good at motion graphics and I'm not. I was an editor who fell into it because out of necessity. And I absolutely love design. I love graphics, but I also know that I'm never going to be at the level of the kind of people we love to hire, when we're lucky enough to have a budget to hire somebody.
And I think also we've now come to the point where Biagio and I have done pretty much every job on every production, and it allows us to speak with those people now doing this job. And one, if they're like, oh, it's going to take, 20 hours, we're like, no, it's not. It's going to take you 4. Or if they're like, I think I could do it, and be like, you know what, I think you're going to need help because this is going to be much bigger. I've done this job before, and, I want to make sure that you're set up to succeed. So that's one. Like, it's important to be able to talk to people and to, help that go, which is very important to what Biagio is doing.
Yeah. So I help out when I have to.
And I think the second part is also knowing how to execute things. We've always said, right, the tool is just a tool. It's the person using the tool that's the artist. And so while I think what Biagio is saying, we want to hire people that are better than us, is like, does he know how to use these tools? Yes. Does he know how to use them as good as somebody else? Maybe not. But we're also at a point where it's like motion graphic artists, like we believe in the artists. We believe editors shouldn't be button pushers. They should be editors. They should be craftspeople. We believe DPs shouldn't just hold a camera. They should know how to tell stories visually. Same thing with motion graphic artists. We're not just looking for people who can create something. We're looking for people to design something. And so when we have the budget, we want to spend it on the design part where someone can come up with a really cool look or a really nice, concept. And then we can help execute that concept if the money runs out, in terms of, the back end of it. But that's the part where, when Biagio says we want to hire people who are better than us, it's like we have so much stuff to think about that if we can bring someone in whose sole purpose is to really think of a design for something, that's a luxury that, we crave for.
Biagio, I love you just kind of glossed over. Yeah, I learned Synthize. Yeah, I learned Cinema 4D as though that was like a small feat. You should take some credit. So I have actually worked on reality shows in a couple of capacities. In one capacity, I would be freelancing at, say, a studio doing the show open. And that show open might, it might take 2 to 3 weeks, concepting, designs, animation. And, it's sort of a normal pace. I've also been the After Effects guy on a show, and that's a different beast. So do you guys hire sort of both situations, and do you look for different people or different talents if you're hiring someone who's like doing, the sexy show open versus I need someone who's going to make 14 graphics per episode and every episode has to be done in 2 weeks?
Right. Well, I'll let Biagio handle that, but I think this gets us to the kit mentality aspect of what we look for. There's 2 steps, and ideally the second step, if everything is designed correctly, our assistant editors can help. If it's just about, okay, once we have a lower third design, if I need 30 lower thirds, I should be able to have our assistant editor, make lower thirds 2 through 30, because it's literally just changing the names on top of the graphic,
sure.
Right? So
right. So I think, we're presented with a lot of different situations where we're going to work with a motion graphics artist. Now, I would say in probably half the cases, we're dealing with motion graphics artists who work at the network. And so in a lot of ways, while we have input, they're answering directly to their bosses, who are the network that are paying them. And so ultimately, the way we interact with them is limited. And we hate that, honestly. But so there's that, and they will sometimes present boards and we're like, yeah, we love these boards. And then the final thing looks nothing like those boards.
Right.
So I think what we look for, it's on a project by project basis. But Joke mentioned this idea of a kit mentality, and it actually sprang from working with one of the bigger motion graphics houses we'd worked with a while back, and also now our next project we're actually working with the Mill, who's a great company.
Amazing, yeah.
Yeah, and and what the idea, when we're filling both roles, so you find a place like the Mill. And by the way, whenever we're going to work with a company like that, almost always the budget's not big enough, because the shows we do, they aren't big. So when they take them on, it's because they feel like a real spark to the project, and it's something they feel might be great for the reel, but it's really, it's different, and they want to do it, and they have a chance to be creative. And so there's a variety of reasons why they come on. But when they do, you have to sort of think about design in a way that's not only creative, but that can be, repurposed in a lot of ways. So while I can't say a lot about this show that's coming up, it hasn't aired yet, it's later this year. What we did is we wanted to have a really awesome show open, but we knew we needed a ton of elements for the rest of the show. And so had we given the entire budget that we had to the Mill to make everything, the design would have suffered. So instead, what we did is we said, let's figure out a way to design the opening titles so that within that sequence, the elements that we need for the rest of the show, whether it's lower thirds or maps or infographics, are there. Like, let's be creative that way, so that you could spend all your time on the design and really think about the aesthetic. And then we, on our end, separate from this budget, so we're not touching they're not getting paid any less. They're getting paid the same. They're just focusing on design on our end, because, again, being innovative and trying to maximize what we do, then we find the way to take those elements and repurpose them with guidance from the Mill. Like, we can be like, hey, we're thinking about trying A, B, and C, and, we might do a phone call with them, and they'll be like, hey, you should try X. But they're not spending resources on that other than having a quick call with us. So now what we have on our end is I want to hire somebody who knows, After Effects in Cinema 4D inside and out, who can have enough design aesthetic that they can understand why what the Mill did is good, and they're not going to just be colorblind or tone deaf to why, suddenly having a lower third that's got 4 lines instead of 2 is wrong, or why it's a bad idea to suddenly change the font on this map that was perfectly designed by the Mill. So they have enough design sense to stay within that world, right? And so I think that those are the two ways we look at it. I want our design money to go to design, and I want the day-to-day work to be done by someone who can do the day-to-day work quickly and is in our offices.
I think one of the things that we haven't really explained yet is that, I think, and I don't know your audience, but if you think about scripted, the only quote-unquote motion graphics design is the show open. But when you think about reality television, and especially documentary reality television, there are a lot of graphic elements, whether it's lower thirds or time cards or timelines or maps or infographics.
Sure. Nat Geo, you could do Iron Man heads-up display type graphics.
Right. So there are so many different types of graphics within the body of the show. And so, that's a lot. So, when we talk to the Mill, we're like, listen, we need lower thirds. They're like, oh my God, you need me to make 50 lower thirds? We're like, no, just design one and we'll change the titles on all of these. Or, hey, how would you design what a full screen infographic looks like? Let's say we need to have 4 lines of text. Like, what would that look like? So they design it, and then we quote unquote repurpose it. But this way, what we get, and this is the great part, is design-wise, the look across the episode, across the series is uniform and makes sense, and it's tied to that great open they design, rather than we just spend money on a great open design without talking to them or without having them even involved in the quote-unquote in-show graphics, and then it turns to be not quite uniform, or, and then it feels very,
well, which I've been guilty of plenty of times. Those NBC graphics she's talking about, they didn't look at all like the show open. They were just last-minute stuff we had to throw in. And I was very early in my quote-unquote MoGraph hobby.
But nobody who's designing the open was even involved in designing the in-show graphics. And then as a producer, you're just like, oh, man, I need another graphic. Okay, well, I'll do my best to try and make something happen. Now that we're the executive producers and we're talking to people like them, we're like, okay, we want to start out, as you develop even the show open, think about elements that we can then repurpose, instead of, I'm going to do a show open, that's while it's absolutely gorgeous, but for example, The Crown on Netflix, I love that open of that Crown, but there would be nothing there for us to repurpose. You know what I mean? Like,
right.
It's a beautiful thing, but if you think, for example, about Making a Murderer, right? You have this great open, which feels very True Detective. But if you think about then all the graphics that have to happen, not just within each episode, but over the course of the series, timelines, family trees, maps, all that stuff, it has to feel uniform and connected so you're watching the same show. So I think that's what's great about motion graphic design within unscripted, whether it's, standard reality or documentary, that really allows a designer to kind of think bigger than just, okay, here's a 20-second open.
Right. Okay. So our audience, they run the gamut. You've got people working in-house at studios like The Mill, and you've also got freelancers and you've got students who are trying to get their foot in the door. And it sounds like even at the relatively small scale of, doing an unscripted show open, which as far as like a MoGraph job goes, I mean, it's not tiny, but it's not enormous. You can do that in a variety of different ways. And I'm curious if you have the opportunity to have The Mill design your show open, you have The Mill design your show open. That's what you do. And then you hire, I'm sure, a freelancer or something to come in and take that art direction and apply it to the rest of the package. But when you have no budget and it's not something a company like The Mill is interested in, are there ever situations where you just hire a freelancer? You try to find that one person that is like pretty good designer, pretty good animator. Maybe they can do a little bit of, compositing stuff, because I know there's always like clean up. That sign needs to be blurred out. We need to like blur that person's face. Do you ever try to find a Swiss Army knife and just have them do it all?
Yes. A lot of times, and I'll give you a couple of concrete examples. So we did a documentary called Dying to Do Letterman that was like 7 years ago now, that had a theatrical release and toured the circuit. And that was completely 100% funded by me and Joke. And by funded, I mean mostly we shot it and edited. We did not have a lot of money. And I remember I called Momoko and I was like, hey, listen, we're really excited about this documentary. I got $5,000. What do you think? And they said, I think no. And it was a really personal project. The story is, it was a friend of ours whose lifelong dream was to perform comedy on the David Letterman show, and he was actively chasing that dream when he found out he might only have 5 years to live. He was diagnosed with incurable liver cancer, and he decided he was going to dedicate what was left of his life to chasing that dream of performing on Letterman. And it was like this amazing story. I mean, I get choked up just talking about it, and it's all these years later. It was this amazing story about what are dreams worth, and is a dream really worth your life? And if you only had so much time left, would you spend it chasing your dream? And so I was like, it was so important to us to get everything right, not only for our friend, but for this movie that we felt like was a really special opportunity to tell this story about dreams. And so once I realized Momoko didn't give a crap about that,
yeah.
I was like, I get it. I understand. We started looking for that person, and we went to the web. We looked at reels. I visited websites, and we found somebody, whose style that we liked a lot, and we thought fit some of the things we were thinking. And we reached out, and I said, this is what I need, and this is what we have, and I'm totally willing to work within your style to meet the budget, because I know it's not a lot of money. And he came over and he watched the movie and fell in love with it. And he did, I would say, 80% of the hero graphics for the movie, and it really, and again, it was beyond my skill level, and it's especially 7 years ago, my skill level at the time. So that was one example. Another example, actually, like on a show like Commercial Kings, where we ran into a situation where even though we were originally told we fell under certain documentary rules, the studio got nervous about a lot of things that were in the background that legally we should have been able to show because we really did sort of fall under news and docs, but they wanted to blur everything, and that was going to look awful. You've seen the reality shows where they blur everything and it just looks ridiculous. Right. So instead I was like, we're not blurring it, we're replacing it all.
Nice.
So we hired which was a pain in the butt, but we hired an After Effects artist to come in, and we're like, how can we, can we track this? Can we replace it with stuff we can clear? And in most of the cases, we didn't blur because it would have been a lot of blurring. So to watch the show, you just assume that was the art or that was the stuff that was there. So in that case, I was just looking for someone who could really track and replace. And this guy had a reel of a bunch of stuff he tracked and replaced. I was like, great. So again, that's another example. Andy Hurst, who is our in-house guy now, who's somebody I actually met through our blog in podcast a long time ago. And he just reached out and he was like, I really like that you guys are so hands-on. I also do all this stuff. If there's ever an opportunity to work together, we've now worked together for like 4 years. He's on 2 shows right now over here. So yeah, we kind of set him up with an After Effects Cinema 4D bay, and he is our Swiss Army knife when he can handle it. And then when it gets out of control, we look for other Swiss Army knives. So it's part of the reason actually why I love School of Motion, and I love your philosophy. I've read through your site and the idea that you train generalists. And some people think of generalist as like a dirty word for some reason. I think generalists are awesome. To me, a generalist is the ultimate creative. It's somebody that has to understand the whole process and be able to come in and do anything. And even if maybe, they're not, quite as good as the guy who's dedicated his whole life to only doing tracking, they can do a great job and it can be an enjoyable experience. And so that's why I love generalists. Because I think they're creative, out of the box thinkers.
So
and I look for those people.
Well, first of all, thank you for saying that. And you're absolutely right. I mean, that is why we sort of try to create generalists. And in, before School of Motion, in my MoGraph career, I was a generalist, and I loved it because it opened up a ton of opportunities. And so I kind of want to try to give some career advice here. So there's a lot of probably small companies like yours that are producing. I mean, just the sheer amount of content that comes out every day is mind-boggling. And you mentioned that there was a time where you had to go out and find freelancers, which, can be very tough. And my philosophy is freelancers should be finding you. So for your company and companies like yours, do you like it when freelancers email you and they're like, hey, I'm a MoGraph generalist. I can do some VFX. I can design. I can animate. And here's my reel, and let me know if you ever need anything. Do you guys look forward to stuff like that? Or do you prefer to kind of seek things out, seek people out yourself?
I think always be putting yourself out there. So yes, we have a jobs@jokeproductions.com email, and people email us their latest reel or updated credit list or resume all the time. I would say, once a year. People will be like, hey, by the way, here's what I've been working on the last year or whatever. I think it's super helpful. It's where we always go when we're looking for something specific. Be like, okay, who's available? Who sent us their stuff? Who are we looking for? That's also where we've met people like Andy who are like, hey, here's who I am. And we're like, wow, we really like this guy's stuff. Let's come in for a general meeting. Maybe we don't have anything right now, but it's good to put a face with the name and, figure out maybe there's something down the line. And then, usually we end up working on a pitch. We're like, you know what, the person we just met with, we should give him a shot at this. So I think that is absolutely, I would say, keep putting yourself out there. But yes, I think, Biagio, you also, when we were looking for the documentary, we're looking on specific job boards.
Yeah, well, I posted on a couple of job boards. We have a blog, and so a lot of times I'll put up a job posting at the blog, and then like guys like Stu Maschwitz will retweet it. A lot of like VFX guys follow him or whatever, and you just be like, hey, they're looking for such and such a position, or someone who can do X. So I'm pretty social. We're really active on Twitter. We're Joke and Biagio on Twitter, and like super easy. We try to reply to every single person who tweets to us, and it's usually the two of us replying. Sometimes it'll be our assistant if it's like a general question we can just point to a link, but a lot of people I've met on Twitter. I met Andy actually tweeted to me. We hired our very first assistant editor off of Twitter. One of our DPs for one of our shows I met on Twitter. I love Twitter. I think it's great. It's a real easy way to do like quick little back and forth, and it's easy for people to send links. not everybody uses Twitter as much as I do. That's something for me. But you can find other producers who are on Twitter. I think it's like a nice non-confrontational way to reach out, and it's very easy to click a link and take a quick look at something. I also, like Joke said, we have jobs@jokeproductions.com as an email that we post on a lot of the boards, and people can send a link over to that. Obviously, we can't hire everybody, like we are a small shop. But a lot of times I'll refer people to other companies. I just recently we met a great DP who we didn't have anything for, but we got him a job somewhere else, because we all talk to each other. So I just, that's our way of giving back, I feel like, to the community. We do a blog. We try to point people to jobs if we can. I think for us, that's how we are. Not every company is like that. If I can offer a piece of advice, though, if you want to break in at some of like the big companies, like say a Mark Burnett or a 3Ball, or some of these other companies that do a lot of shows and do a lot of graphics, emailing the owners is probably not the way to go. We're kind of weird. I think we've established that. we're a little odd. But what you can do, who you want to find are the post supers and the lead AEs. Okay, and I'm telling you, this is a great piece of advice. I bet you not a lot of people have told your artists. Maybe they have, I don't know. But if you go to these reality companies, the real people they're going to be looking for a last minute graphic or looking to bring in an artist, it's going to be the post-production supervisor and the lead AEs. It's usually a post super making the final decision, but the lead AEs, nobody ever reaches out to them. So if they get an email like, wow, someone thought I was important. I actually saw someone become a big editor that way. He was an editor who had never worked, and he was smart enough to reach out to the lead AEs at these big companies who were like, wow, this guy's reaching out to me, and they passed his stuff up the chain, and he was a working editor within like a month and a half. So some good advice, and you can find this on IMDb. You can find this on LinkedIn. Figure out who the post-production supervisors and the lead AEs are at these companies. They also hop around the other companies. So if you could make a relationship with them, as many of them as you can, you're building your network in our industry. So a lead AE who works here on one show might do 5 other companies in the next year. He now knows you. That's 6 companies you could potentially work at. So I would say that's a real good way if you want to take an active approach to meeting people. Start with the lead AEs and the post supers at these unscripted companies.
That is brilliant advice. Biagio, thank you for that. That's pretty close to exactly what I tell people to do, is to, I usually tell them to find like a producer, someone like that. But I mean, those titles, by the way, AE, I'm assuming assistant editor.
Sorry, yeah, lead assistant editor. And You can even reach out to assistant editors too. I mean, basically what you want is, if you email Mark Burnett, he's not going to email you back.
Correct.
If you email us, we might email you back. But at most of these companies, you'll hear back from an AE or a lead AE or a post-production supervisor.
You should reach out to anybody whose life you would make easier.
Yeah.
I love you guys. All right, let me ask you one more question about the MoGraph artists that you work with. So, every MoGraph artist, they've got a set of attributes and they're different strengths and things like that. And so some people are a really good fit for long, slow projects where they can really obsess over all the little details. Some people like to, be on something for 3 days and move on. And typically, I always think that the faster you can work, the better it is in general. But in some situations, if you're doing a project that takes 6 months and is just filled with nuance and hand-drawn animation, then you can't go fast. How important is the speed at which an artist can work when you hire like a freelancer to come and work on one of your shows?
Usually pretty important.
Crucial.
Yeah. It's rare. So again, I think you need to know the kind of project you're signing up for.
But again, I think it's different between design and execution.
Yeah.
Right. So obviously, if we're talking about design, like, we know it's going to take a couple of weeks. You got to brainstorm, you got to find inspiration, you got to try different things. But when you're talking about we're bringing someone in freelance to execute, I mean, it's like, we got to go. Yeah.
So I think we try to be really honest about that. And so, for instance, on our documentary, which we were funding, we had all the time in the world. I wasn't worried about finding someone who could work fast. I was worried about finding someone who cared. I was worried about finding someone who got the story, understood the material, and would, with the budget we have in their spare time, create something special. on the show we're on right now that I have Andy locked away in a room for, that guy's kicking out 20 graphics a day. Okay.
Right.
There is no rest for the wicked. And so I know he's going to do it. I know he's going to come through. And when we first tried Andy, I didn't know. So you hope, you like to hear from people concrete examples of what they've done. You like to be able to call somebody and be like, what was it like working with this artist? So if they have a good reference, that's important. But I think just as important as it is, we feel it's super important for us to be honest with them. It's really important for an artist to be honest with us. Don't take a job if you think you can't do it. Maybe I understand that it's hard. It's hard to pass up work, but you can do longer term damage. And it's the same for us. Like, we've passed up shows. Maybe a network wants us to do something and we're just like, guys, we really can't do that at the time, the budget. We're going to make you unhappy. And as much as I need to pay for my kids to go to school, I don't want to leave a bad taste in your mouth. And I know that's really hard when you're a starving artist, because we were there. We were living out of the 1-bedroom apartment in Hollywood, eating way more ramen noodles than any person should. Like, we've been there. We know. But you got to be honest. If you don't think you can do the job, I've had people who said, you know what, I don't think I can do this one, and I hire them on something else because I respect that honesty. When it goes the other way and someone's like, oh, I can totally do this, and they deliver like a look board, which is clearly from borrowed materials, but they're like, it's going to look just like this, and then it looks nothing like that, and it's completely out of their league, and you trusted them, and they just couldn't do it, and they weren't honest with you or themselves. We're never working with those people again.
Right.
If anyone calls us, we can't in good conscience give them a good reference. So it's a conversation, and it's different on every job.
Yeah. And listen, there's people that come highly recommended that just aren't the right fit for whatever reason, whether it's the project or, again, we are more hands-on in the DIY attitude here. So some people don't like that. So, and that's fine. I think, my main thing is, because it is freelance and we've both taken jobs that we're like, oh, I don't know if we can do this, but okay, we're jumping in the deep end and we're going to go and do it. Because it's a freelance business, we've now made the commitment that we will come through no matter what. And so that's part of what I look for in freelancers is it's like, okay, if you're going to take that risk and you're going to say, I think I can do this, I really can, I'm going to jump in the deep end, only jump in knowing that you will figure out how to swim and you will do this. Because if halfway through you're like, okay, guys, I'm drowning, I can't do this, you're messing up the whole production. And so it's one of those things where it's like, really be careful when you make that decision. And I'm not saying don't ever do it, because obviously that's how we got ahead in the business, by doing that.
Oh, sure. We told everybody we could do anything.
But
we made sure we did it then.
But we made sure we did it. And that meant that there were nights that we were sleeping 3 hours a night because we were like, oh my, we need to get this done. We have to figure out how to do this. And then we need to do that. So we always came through in the end. Sometimes it was really hard for us. And sometimes there were learning experiences like, we'll never jump in that deep end again. But it's one of those things, again, because it's freelance, and a lot of times we're talking about, it's a 4-week job or a 6-week job. If it takes you 3 weeks to figure out you can't do it, like, the whole production is now behind schedule.
That is excellent advice. And I always say, when that's actually what I love about freelancing, is that you're putting your reputation on the line every single time you say yes. And that's kind of exhilarating for some people, but you have to move heaven and earth to stay true to your word. So you guys have been incredibly generous with your time. I do have one more question. I don't think it's going to be a short answer either, so I apologize.
That's okay.
So, I'm sure everybody listening has noticed that there has been a big change in the way we're consuming media lately. Netflix is probably the best example. Award-winning show after show after show after show, and they are not unscripted. And you've got HBO Go, and to a smaller extent, you've got Hulu and YouTube. And so there's a lot of content being created for these streaming services where I'm curious if that model is going to support unscripted TV the way the cable model has. I used to sit around and flip through channels, and MTV True Life would come on, and sure, that'll keep my attention for 15 minutes. But if I sit down to Netflix, I almost never watch something like that. It's always something that, probably has a much bigger budget. Let's put it that way. So are you worried at all about the industry you're in, this unscripted content production, do you think that might start to diminish now that you've got so many other, Amazon jumping in and doing big budget scripted shows? Does that worry you at all? Or do you think that there's still a future for this on whatever media platform we end up using in the next 10 years?
So if you look at the cable TV channels and you see what rates the best for them, a lot of times it's marathons. It's Housewives marathons. It's Snapped true crime marathons. It's House Hunter marathons. And marathoning is another way of saying binge watching, right? So the Netflix, the Amazons, the Hulus of the world who are, banking on binge watching have also noticed that. And, we're in the very early stages and a lot of their content hasn't made it on the streaming platforms. But all of those have now unscripted departments, and they have hired unscripted executives from the NBCs, from the Bravos, from those cable channels who do all the quote unquote reality shows that you're thinking about. Those executives are now working at Netflix and Amazon and Hulu, making those kinds of shows.
We were just on the phone with Netflix last week. So, as a matter of fact, I'm not going to say which digital platform, but our big show that's coming up later that we're doing with The Mill, we almost did with one of those digital platforms you're talking about. And it was a really tough decision. But when you see where the show ended up, you'll understand why we went where we did. But we were talking to them both.
So obviously some of those unscripted shows are already available on the Netflixes of the world. And so clearly they must be doing good enough for Netflix to be starting their entire own unscripted department, well-funded, again, hiring top-level execs from our business to go run that. And they are looking for their Housewives franchise. They're looking for their Duck Dynasty. So again,
but they're also looking for high-end documentary, which is fantastic. I mean, think about Making a Murderer, right? I mean,
right.
I mean, it's all of a sudden where there used to be no money for documentary. There's money for documentary. This is so like for me. So I'm like on the fence. Part of me is super excited and part of me is terrified. And I'll tell you why. I'm super excited because these digital platforms have tons of money and they're spending it on programming and they're spending it on all kinds of programming, which is great. Because of their model, they're able to spend more. They can go make a Stranger Things, which was fantastic. And they can do a Making a Murderer, which is also great. On the other hand, it's like, are they going to become Walmart where they put all the cable channels out of business, and then once they're gone, they're like, okay, well, we're not paying anything anymore. I mean, we're just going to drop all our rates and pay everybody nothing since we put everybody out of business. And that's kind of what Walmart does to the small little boutique shops in a neighborhood, right? I hope that doesn't happen, so that whole end of the business model, that remains to be seen. I will say in this moment, for most unscripted producers, there's nothing more alluring and exciting than those digital platforms, especially for documentary, where you suddenly can get a budget to go do something you feel is important that would never be able to rate on a cable network.
That's really interesting. I didn't see that side of it. Thanks for pointing that out. So, there was a press release on your site about a show you guys are producing called 3 Days to Live.
Yes.
And it's going to be on the Oxygen network. But the press release was that Oxygen is rebranding itself as a true crime network for young women, I believe. And before it was sort of like the Women's Network, and they would show programming geared towards women, and now they're pivoting a little bit and doing this true crime thing. And so maybe the reason I asked the question was because to me, I've seen that happen before. And it seems a little bit like a desperation move. Like, okay, our market is leaving us. We need to find a new market, or we need to find a better niche so we can really attract that niche. Whereas Netflix doesn't have to do that. Netflix gets everybody. But to your point, I mean, yeah, they're spending a lot more on their shows than $50,000 an episode. Yeah.
Well, all right. Not to pull back the curtain too much, but the Netflix original, the Netflix originals has different buckets, right? So obviously, you're doing David Fincher House of Cards. You're spending a ton of money. They're looking for their housewives. Those budgets are going to be the same budgets that cable TV is paying you. It's not going to all of a sudden be David Fincher money to go produce a housewife show. You know what I mean?
Right.
So I wouldn't worry about that. I mean, I think in terms of what Oxygen's doing and, where's cable going, who knows? I think that, obviously there's a lot more happening with the apps and making it easier for people to watch the shows, not just, on TV, but, through the TVs, the network's app and et cetera, et cetera. Again, throwing back the curtain a little bit, if you think about, what was Oxygen and, how were they defined, and it was a women's network, but there's a lot of women's networks. And if you look, again, step back at the conglomerate that owns Oxygen, which is NBC Universal, they also own Bravo. They also own E. So there was a lot of cannibalizing happening within that conglomerate, right? Between Oxygen, E, and Bravo, like it starts feeling maybe too similar. And so how can Oxygen separate itself from the other two if you have a portfolio of cable networks? Crime is doing extremely well. Their crime marathons do great. Crime repeats very well. So they can air it any time of the week, any day, and people will tune into it. One of the most successful cable networks still today is Discovery ID, which runs nothing but crime. Investigation Discovery. So I think from an NBC Universal perspective, looking at Oxygen, which was already doing crime, and going, hey, that works well. This is how we can differentiate it so we're no longer cannibalizing our audience within our own portfolio of networks. I mean, it makes perfect business sense.
Thank you for going into so much detail. This stuff is absolutely fascinating to me. I don't know if it is to anybody else, but hopefully it is. Yeah. Okay.
I don't know if your mographers are going to love this or not. If we've bored you to tears, I'm so sorry. I hope we get to hire you to make up for it.
I'll tell you what, despite all of the fear about, media dollars leaving television, going elsewhere, what does that mean? I mean, I really think that for a motion designer, this is the best time ever to get into the game, because it doesn't matter where the content ends up. There's a lot of content being done, and it all needs After Effects, all of it,
Yeah,
we're in the same boat, right? We're storytellers, we're content creators. So, wherever the content will end up airing, whether it's on this digital platform or whether it's on traditional cable television, it's fine by us. As long as we can find an audience through whichever platform it is, we're creating content for all platforms.
Yeah, and it's funny because we started out in wanting to do scripted. We moved into unscripted. We love it, But I'm like, oh, really? So my worst case scenario might be someday I have to go back to scripted. That's not so bad, Oh, woe is me.
That's a first world problem.
Screenplays, So overall, I mean, listen, I feel very lucky and blessed, as I'm sure many of your mographers do, who get to work in a job they love. My last job before really doing this industry, I was still delivering pizzas for Pizza Hut. I've washed dishes, I've bagged groceries, I've worked those jobs. And I always say to myself, even on the worst days, I'm like, I was happy. I was happy enough delivering pizzas, so I should love every day of this. I should just love it. There's no room to complain. So wherever the adventure takes me, I'm game. If I have to go back to delivering pizzas, I will.
Well, you know what? That is a great sentiment. And I want to thank both of you for coming on. This was a really interesting, fascinating conversation for me. And I think the audience is going to love it too. As I said before, we will be linking to everything you guys have done, because you're doing a lot of really useful, interesting content, on your blog. And it's some of it could be really helpful to a freelance motion designer too. But I want to say thank you guys again for coming on. This was awesome.
Oh, thank you for having us. I'm still a little starstruck. It's nice to finally talk to you, Joey. And I hope down the line we can find a way to be useful to you sometime.
Well, if you ever need an actor with a really nice round shaved head, you just let me know.
All right,
you got it.
Sounds good.
I'm sure you could tell that I had a lot of fun during this interview, and I hope you really dug it too. There was a lot of really great tips in there about freelancing, designing with a kit mentality, so let us know if you use any of these tips. Hit us up on Twitter @School of Motion, or email us team@schoolofmotion.com. Check out Biagio and Joke's work at jokeproductions.com and head to producingunscripted.com to learn more about what goes into the pitching and creation of shows like the ones they work on. Also, it would be so sweet if you took 1 minute and rated and reviewed us on iTunes. I know it's a little weird, but it's one of the best ways to help us spread the word and keep this party going so that we can continue to bring you amazing guests and cover interesting topics on the podcast. Thank you so much for listening. You rock. Peace.